The framework of MTSS, it's divided into four categories. You have your instructional piece, your academics, you have your behavioral piece, your attendance, then you have your social emotional. Most school districts are really good at the academic because we've been doing this for a long time. It's the other three that we tend to struggle, mainly because in some schools, some of these systems, they didn't really have to be supported for the most part, like attendance, for example. You have some schools that have great attendance, but over the last few years, those three systems have needed to be really propped up because our kids are just coming in with a lot of needed supports. Take, for example, in the attendance, most school districts went from having, let's say, an average of 96% attendance. After the pandemic, it dropped to the low 90s.
This is the Engaging Leadership Show, where we uncover the stories and strategies behind successful educational leadership. Today's episode is the first in our mini-series called MTSS-in-Action. What does MTSS stand for? It stands for Multi-Tiered System of Supports, and I'm sure many who are listening are familiar with it. And what it is a challenging dance to be able to support students across academics, their behavior, social emotional learning, across the spectrum of needs that students might have. And so this involves heavy coordination within each school building, as well as coordination from the school building to the district office. And today we have somebody who lives and breathes this every day from the district to be able to talk through some of the best practices and challenges that they face in this process. So listen in and dig deep. Today's episode is a good one. Our guest today oversees the Student Services Department. This department collaborates with school sites, district office, and other educational institutions to provide comprehensive services to meet the needs of all students in the district. Prior to his current role, our guest held the position of Senior Executive Director of Educational Services at Westminster School District, and he holds a doctorate in education from the University of Southern California. It's a great privilege to have in our studios today Dr. Moises Merlos. He's the Director of Student Services at Banning Unified School District. Moises, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So tell us a little bit more about Banning Unified. I'm so glad to have a repeat guest from your district, but for those of us who have not listened to the previous episode about Banning Unified, please share a little bit more about the district.
So Banning Unified is located about 65 miles east of LA. It's between LA and closer to Palm Springs. It's off the 10 freeway. So it's a community that really was just a pass-through community as travelers were going from one area to another. But as building moved a little bit more east and so forth, the community started expanding a little bit. Our district's fairly small. We have about 40 to 100 students. Our socioeconomics, it's low to middle class in our area, but it's very diverse. Again, high Hispanic population, about a third white, very small African-American population, but the community is extremely diverse. And being new to the community myself, they're very invested in making Banning the best community that it can be as well. So it's definitely been a pleasure to be here.
It's awesome. And I'm so glad to have you on the show because we are talking about the multi-tiered system of support. And this is going to be part of a series known as the MTSS-in-Action mini-series within the Engaging Leadership Show. And taking your perspectives today is going to be really useful for many out there who are trying to figure out how to implement this system, what are some of the challenges that they're facing, and how others have handled these challenges as well. So really getting perspectives from other professionals in the field. And when we talk about the MTSS within the context of Banning Unified, what does that mean to you?
So the framework of MTSS, it's divided into four categories. You have your instructional piece, your academics, you have your behavioral piece, you have your attendance, and then you have your social emotional. So most school districts are really good at the academic because we've been doing this for a long time. It's the other three that we tend to struggle, mainly because in some schools, some of these systems, they didn't really have to be supported for the most part, like attendance, for example. You have some schools that have great attendance, but over the last few years, those three systems have needed to be really propped up because our kids are just coming in with a lot of needed supports. Take, for example, in the attendance, most school districts went from having, let's say, an average of 96% attendance. After the pandemic, it dropped to the low 90s. So all of a sudden, we needed to really support those systems. On the behavior, same thing. Even though some schools and some school districts were doing great, once again, after the pandemic, those systems needed to be supported because we started seeing some major behavioral concerns within our students. And then lastly, even prior to the pandemic, the social emotional component was really started to get some steam because we really started to understand that we needed those supports. And of course, the pandemic just compounded those issues as well. So now my side of the office, for example, really focuses on supporting those three components, which is why I work in conjunction with my other colleagues within the district to support the academic component, which again, the ultimate goal is to support the kid from a holistic perspective to ensure that they are being successful, not just on the academic, but on all the other realms as well.
Exactly. And the idea really is to allow kids to graduate and become productive members of their communities wherever they may be. And this involves all of those four different aspects that you mentioned.
That's correct.
That's incredible. So that's at the high level. And in most cases, I think districts and educators have gotten around that language of MTSS, which maybe goes back almost 10 years now, and maybe took a big shift in the middle of COVID. But today, when you think about the implementation of MTSS, how do you go even just getting alignment around what good looks like around attendance, behavior / discipline, and social emotional aspects of a student's life, and separate them into the three different tiers and that whole continuum that we spoke about?
I think the key is to really understand the programs that we have. Me, having been part of multiple districts, I can tell you that all districts are doing MTSS. So everybody is MTSSing. The question is, do you really understand the programs that you have and how they're interrelated and how to support them? You have to separate them because the division of labor is going to be really important. So that way your counselors do X, your principals do X, your other coaches do X. But at the end of the day, all those individuals also need to be speaking with each other because these services need to be interrelated. Take, for example, a student who has poor attendance. Someone and somewhere within our MTSS programs, we should be able to find out why is that that student is not attending school. Is it a social emotional piece? Is it a parent component? Is it a school component? Is it a school safety? Is it an academic issue? When you look at a kid, we have our own story. As you mentioned, the key is for us as the adults within these systems to really get to the root cause of the concern. And then you can start really attacking it by looking at what programs you have and filling in those holes, which is why it's important, as I mentioned, that every entity really needs to invest in understanding what their MTSS systems look like and where their holes are. And I can tell when I've done these exercises with schools or with our entire district leadership team, there is always a missing component that as soon as you start looking at the framework as a whole, you start seeing this is what we're missing, that particular population. So let's prop that up and let's start providing those services. So again, you have to go from the big picture down to the student level, separate those services, but at the same time, you're integrating the philosophies. So once again, you can support the students holistically as well.
Yeah, I love how you put it, because you're not just taking, say, a pattern of poor attendance and disciplining the child because of that. Like what you're suggesting that MTSS should be doing is to take a more holistic look at what's going on with this student. And it could well be that they just need some discipline, but it could well be that there are other aspects of their life that need addressing as well. And I also like how you talked about the need for professionals in each of these different disciplines to come together and be able to form that holistic picture of that child so that the appropriate intervention can be prescribed.
Right.
Even the theory, just describing it, sounds complex and it's going to be difficult to implement and operationalize. What are some of the guardrails that you think about when thinking about pulling all this information together and guiding the professionals on the ground to make good decisions about students?
I think it really comes down to communication. Take, for example, when you look at discipline, the individuals that really work with discipline at our schools tend to be our principals and assistant principals. The individuals that deal with the social emotional supports are your counselors for the most part. Your individuals that deal with the attendance pieces tend to be your clerks that work in the office. Maybe your APs, your principals are involved with the systems. So you can see that you have multiple personnels taking care of different parts of the system. But the key is when you speak to the counselors who may be the experts in the social emotional, they also need to understand the ed code piece when it comes to discipline. They also need to understand the intricacies of attendance and getting kids to school. And the same thing when you're speaking with your assistant principals or anyone, your deans that are working with the discipline, they also need to understand the social emotional. Now, they're not going to be the experts, but they need to understand how those things are interrelated. So that way, whether I'm dealing with the kid on an attendance concern or a behavioral concern or a social emotional, that individual can see it from the bigger perspective of MTSS that, look, this is one piece that may solve that puzzle and actually get that kid back on track. So again, the key is going to be really intentional training for everyone to really understand how these pieces fit together, how their own jobs, how their own expertise really have an impact on some of the other jobs and expertise and systems within the system. So again, what I've done, especially right now at Banning, is that I oversee the counselors now. I work with the APs. I oversee the attendance, and everyone gets the same information, but they get it from their perspective. To give you an example, just last week, we met with our school secretaries. Now, for the most part, they're not going to be providing social emotional support, the discipline. They may touch the attendance, but they're a big part of the school. So spending some time with them just to explain how these systems work, it's huge because they're part with it. However, they're being used within the school systems, then they can actually support the kid as well. So again, it's getting that information out there, getting those trainings, making sure that everybody's on the same page, and then you can really expect to see those results.
I'm glad you mentioned that because so many districts maybe underinvest in the time required to provide that communication, provide that training, and essentially to coordinate efforts across different groups of professionals. That being said, sometimes understandable. There are all these fires that need to be put out in school buildings, metaphorical fires, and sometimes even literal fires that legitimately sometimes you get pushback. And I'm sure you've faced this as well, to say, we don't have time to be able to do this, or there's some staff turnover. So even after you've done a couple of sessions and you think you've got a good thing going, when staff change over the summer or sometimes even in the middle of the year, you got to do that whole thing again. So how do you think about a very systematic approach to keeping everyone on the same page, on the same song sheet, in playing through this orchestra so that kid can benefit?
So what I've used is we take every opportunity to ensure that when we can train our colleagues that every time you have the opportunity to go over these items, that you go over these items as well. So if I have a meeting with the counselors, we speak on this. So it's almost the same message with different forums. Whenever we speak with our leadership team, with our principals, the job for them now is to take that information back to the sites and speak on it in staff meetings, at their PLC meetings, for example. So again, it's really coordinating your efforts and your messages. And one of the things that happens in education is that we have so many initiatives. That's where the message gets lost. So for us is narrowing what those initiatives are. So that way they're really coordinated and that way everyone's actually on the same page. But we take every opportunity to speak on these systems. So again, it just becomes part of what we do within our school district.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that repetition will help even those who have heard the message, say 1,000 times. It doesn't hurt to hear it again.
That's right. And then you also have a support system because, again, I'm a support system. So whether you're a teacher, a secretary, a counselor, you know who to call if you have questions regarding these systems. So they see you. Same thing with our principals. We make sure that our principals become the experts in these systems too. So that way they become the support system. So along with getting the information out and the systems is always having a system there to really support each other. And sometimes we may not have the answers, but we know that there are people there that can help us build these systems.
Got it. I love that. So you're investing in that communication and training does double duty because you're not only training the individual, you're also building a broader systemic support system for any kind of information, resource, best practice within the district, which becomes an asset and compounds in value over time.
Exactly.
So when you think about orchestrating this, because now that you've got everyone on the same song sheet, there pretty much needs to be a conductor within each school building has slightly different needs because in elementary school, you got one teacher that's responsible for the class of say 25 or so students. But then once you get into like middle and high school, things get a bit more complex because you have multiple different teachers, multiple grade level coordinations that are required. Who's responsible for being that conductor in each of these different cases?
So in our world of education, there are multiple individuals that are doing that. It's a collective support system. The best way I can explain it here is that your principles are key because that's where everything happens. And then the district support, so an individual in my position, for example, also needs to be very strong in understanding of these systems as well. To give you an example, just with counseling, if you look at what normally happens in a K-12 district like Banning Unified, your elementary school counselors are really good at the social emotional. And they're good at that because historically, that's the level of support that they've been able to provide at those grade levels. Now, when you look at secondary counselors, they're really good at the college and career component. So when you try to provide social emotional support, your elementary counselors are going to need a different level of support than your secondary counselors. And someone has to coordinate that. And it can't just be the principal, it can't just be the individual here. It has to really be a collective support system. So that way we can definitely get the individuals to the level where they can really support our kids. So the district support is key, but the most important is going to be our site principals. You can't do the job without them. And obviously I have much respect for our principals for that because everything that happens at their school is their responsibility. So we have to ask them to be the experts at just about everything. But again, principals are key. And then alongside that, our teachers are the ones that spend the bulk of the time with our kids as well. And they also need to be well versed in some of these support systems that we have. They may not be the experts, but they definitely need to be aware. So that way they can help point the kids that need the support in the right direction as well too. So again, it's a collaborative effort, but we could not do it without our principals for sure.
Yeah, and I think you touched on a really important challenge that many districts face when trying to implement effective MTSS systems, where the principal and the teachers, these are two critical nodes in the system. At the same time, they're critical nodes in so much of education too. So whether it's emergency crisis response, whether it's instructional methodologies, even just staff performance, that's something that the principals have to be involved in. It's a lot of different complex things vying for the very limited attention of a group of people beyond just the communication, which is super critical and important as we've established. How else have you been allowing the principals and teachers at Banning Unified to level up in their knowledge and application of MTSS principles?
I think once again, it goes back to being able to provide that professional development piece for them. And unfortunately, because we don't have a lot of time to get people out of the classroom, out of their schools to train, it's just being done on an ongoing basis. But I think the key for me as a director is to really be there when people need me. Take, for example, one of our attendance recovery programs, short-term independent study. It's a pretty complex system. I've taken on the road that anyone within the system at the school sites can call me if they need any type of guidance. So a lot of it is being able to take it from the big group presentation type to that individual supports as well. No different than what we want to do with the kids, that we can have assemblies that encompass the entire school population, or we can break it down to the individual student and maybe even have some small group instruction, for example. So it's the same thing with the adult, is being able to do things en masse because that's efficient, but also being there to be able to provide those supports on an individual basis to whether it's a teacher, a principal, counselor. So yeah, it takes quite a bit of time, but again, that's where you really start enhancing your supports. And it doesn't happen overnight. We grow into this because of the limited time that we have, but we have to be there to be able to support our colleagues on an individual basis.
Got it. And one of the things that we talked about earlier was how easy it is sometimes to focus all the supports around instructional pieces and the academics. One of the things that you've been very deliberate about at Banning Unified is to provide for the broader spectrum to ensure that supports around social emotional learning, around discipline and behavior and attendance are also provided. How do you do that systematically such that you're balancing the needs of each student across all of these different dimensions? How is that communicated to like parents and families as they might be new to this whole system of supports as well?
I know I've been speaking a lot about how we communicate with our staff, but we do the same thing with our community as well. We have surveys, for example. We use Panorama. We're using it for the social emotional component. The students take surveys. The staff takes surveys. We are sending surveys to the families as well. We send communication to the family explaining the supports that we're trying to provide. With attendance recovery, for example, all of our community knows about our Saturday Academy program. All of our community knows about our short-term independent study program as well, long-term independent study. It's the communication piece. We have some district level community meetings. We speak on it there. Put it on social media. We send emails. We have LCAP strategic meetings as well at the sites where we're there speaking on these systems and these supports. So wherever we can, we also do the same with our community as well. And again, that's the reason we do it, is because we want this to be systematic. The more individuals that hear it, the more informed they are, and the more they're going to be able to actually use these support systems as well. Let's say at a school building, you have 30 teachers and you have a meeting and there's only 20 there. The other 10 will eventually get this information, whether it's one of their colleagues letting them know or them calling in or maybe a follow-up meeting. It's the same thing with the parent. If you can reach 10 parents, those 10 parents will reach other parents, and word of mouth gets around town. That's the beauty of a small town as well. A lot of our colleagues that work for Banning Unified have kids within the school district. So they work here, they have relatives within the system. So we try to get that information out so that way everyone's on board with what we're trying to do.
Okay, you've done a great job of walking through the strategic landscape of how MTSS should be and how it's been implemented within Banning Unified. I want to get a little bit more tactical around how you bake this into each school building and the operations that they have. Like, how do you get the teachers, the principals, the APs, or the support staff to come together on a regular basis? And how do you get them to discuss students with critical needs to make sure that they don't fall through the cracks? And how does that flow back up to you and the district office? And what do you monitor there?
On attendance, for example, we have a really nice tier system within attendance. Our base program really revolves around the communication with parents when their kid is out. We have the SART and SAR process as well, which is part of our system. We have a system where we have attendance recovery programs too. So all those programs, we train our principals on how the systems work. We train our clerks at the site, our secretaries on how they work. Same thing with our assistant principals. Our counselors know about it as well. Now you have what we call attendance teams at our sites. Hemmering Elementary School, for example, their attendance team meets every Friday at 7 a.m. And what they do is that they literally run these reports and go through and identify the kids that are struggling, also kids that are improving as well. And it's become part of our PBIS system as well, too. So a lot of with these systems is really getting our sites to create these teams so that way they can really spend some time discussing how they can better help the students. Now, there's a lot happening at the sites, but eventually it gets to my office through the SAR process, for example. This year so far, we have seen over 50 kids. And these 50 kids collectively have an attendance rate of maybe 50%. So these are kids that are really struggling with attendance. And we have a district attorney that works with us as well. And she's part of those meetings. And in those meetings, we don't make it to be punitive. It goes back to fact finding. Why is it that this student is not attending school? That happens at the level of my office, at the district level. That's happening every day at the school site. Because whether the counselor, who is also part of that attendance team, is seeing a student, they're also asking those questions. They're also working with those students. Whether it's a clerk, they're also asking those questions, talking to the parents, to the kids. Same thing with our teachers. At Hemmerling, for example, our teachers are the ones that really are overseeing our short-term independent study program. They're the ones that contact the kids. They're the ones who contact the parents. So when you get to a system where everyone's invested in attendance, like Hemmerling Elementary School is, then you have a system where everybody's supporting everyone, including our kids, which is the ultimate goal. But again, it's not me who's managing that piece, is the principal. And the principal at our school, they're doing a phenomenal job running these programs as well. But they're the ones who are having these meetings with kids, with their attendance team, talking to their school site council, talking to their ELAC committee about all these systems. And it just takes a high level of coordination, motivation, and really execution, which is key.
Yeah, discipline has to be there operationally so that this happens week after week to reinforce those practices. You mentioned a few acronyms earlier, and for those of us who may not be familiar with them, you mentioned SAR and ELAC. Could you just very quickly expand?
We're so used to acronyms in education. So the SAR and SAR process, it's an attendance review system. So once a student misses X amount of days, we have what's called a SAR meeting. And at the SAR meeting, it's a school-based meeting where we invite the parent, we invite the kid, your attendance team should be there, your principal, your counselor, and so forth. And you try to get to the root cause of the attendance issue. Now, if the attendance issues continue after we provide some support, then you get to the district level meeting, which is called SARB. And that's where I attend. That's where we have our district level support systems there, including our district attorney, so that the district attorney can explain the legal ramifications of a student not being in school. So those are two separate systems. ELAC, it's basically by federal law, we have to have a committee at each site when you have a certain percentage of language learners. And that's what ELAC is. Our school site council, it's also another mandated committee that includes parents. It can include students at the secondary, your principal, and they also drive the school goals and so forth. They're the ones who approve our categorical fund budgets and so forth. So quite a bit of committees and acronyms and so forth. But once again, the key is to coordinate all those efforts into supporting kids.
So from everything that you've said so far, I'm drawing some common threads around your genuine interest in getting deep into root causes of problems and trying to treat the causes rather than just treating the symptoms. And I understand that you previously were in training to be a doctor before coming to education and now taking on an educational leadership position. Tell me a little bit more about that.
We all have our stories. And coming out of high school, I wanted to be a doctor, so I majored in biology. But just like most starving kids, we started looking for jobs, and I was hired as a tutor at this community school in one of the most at-risk areas in the city of San Bernardino. And I got to meet this really neat lady who ended up getting her bachelor's when she was 54 years old. By the time I met her, she already had her doctorate, and she had created this community school just grant funded. Now she actually has her own elementary named after her in the city of San Bernardino. So she's done some great work. But what I learned from there is that I love being an educator, and I just never looked back. So once I graduated with my biology degree, I started teaching GED classes at that same school as well. And then I moved on to one of the local school districts. I became a science teacher. Eventually, the good fortune that I had is that school that I worked at had a grant, and I was able to get my master's in curriculum and instruction. So my first love was always instruction. And having that science background, you combine those two, you really learn very quickly that you have to get to the root cause of things to be able to solve the problem. Because if you're not getting to the root cause, then all you're doing is targeting the system, which is why when it comes to behavior, we tend to just be punitive instead of trying to figure out what the root cause so we can change that behavior. I live in the world of instruction and I still love it, but I ended up now in the student services side for my own personal growth. Also, I saw that we weren't doing enough to be able to support kids in that realm. And I felt that there were enough curriculum and instruction individuals that can still carry on the instructional piece. And then here I am. But again, it's the same philosophy that you have to get to the root cause of the problem, because if you're not even looking at the root cause of the problem, then as you mentioned, all you're doing is providing services that are mitigating the symptoms, which doesn't solve the problem. And one of the things that you will see if you really dissect budgets from districts, they're very heavy on those tier 3 supports. And those tier 3 supports really revolve around mitigating the system. Your base program is where you really need to prop up to make sure that you're getting to the root cause, but also targeting those root causes to ensure that you don't have so many kids in your tier 2 and tier 3 program. But it's definitely, for me, has been a lifelong journey to get to where I'm at and to learn what I have and to be able to support schools the way I can. And there's always, of course, a lot more growth. Who knows what life is going to bring us? But again, the goal for me is to learn myself, but also to teach what I know. So that way we can really support kids.
How was the transition like when you were almost taken out of the classroom and into administration and leadership? Was that quite a transition for you, or was it just a natural?
It was great for me. I was, once again, blessed. I worked under Miss Sofia Hossa. She was my principal and my first mentor principal. Then I worked under Dr. Heather Griggs. She was also a principal when I was at AP. And what those two individuals did for me is because they saw the strength that I had on the instructional side. So when I went in as an AP, they really helped support that, where I was able to set those into practice, but also learn at the same time. So I was an AP for 6 years, and then I became a principal. And by the time I became a principal, I had done so much within the instructional part that it was fairly normal for me. It got to a point that I felt that I was repeating what I was doing, which is when I started really looking into the other support system. And that's when I think my ability to support the teams that I work with then just flew.
Wow. And if you reflect back and think about your leadership values, how they've evolved over time, I can think of maybe that very scientific approach to leadership being almost like very engineering and surgical and precision focused in the way that you lead seems to have followed you through your leadership. What has changed and evolved when you look back now is different from before?
I think for me, the most part has been the collaborative piece. When you grow up in the world of science, curriculum and instruction, you can do a lot of things on your own. But as you grow as a leader, as a professional, you really quickly begin to understand that you need those support systems yourself as well. So for me, it's being collaborative. That I don't think comes natural to me. But again, my fortune being in the systems of education, having worked with some great people, I've been able to learn those pieces that may not come natural. And it's one of the things that I teach as I work within these teams is that, look, you may have some skills that are inherent to who you are as a human being, but here are some other skills that we need to work on to make sure that we have a functional system and support system for our kids. So I always use myself as the guinea pig, basically, and explain that collaboration, definitely, it's not something that comes naturally to me, but it is something that is essential and truly needed to be able to support not just you, but you to support me and support each other. So at the end, we can support kids.
Got it. And one last question for you, Moises. If you think about some of the other districts out there who may be listening, or even in school building, and they're struggling in that MTSS journey because you're just starting out, trying to make sense of this whole thing. If you boil down everything that you've experienced and shared today into maybe like a 30 seconds or 1 minute sharing, what piece of advice would you be able to give to them to be able to advance their own implementation efforts?
There's several things. So first of all is getting everyone to understand what is MTSS. The second key is to get them to understand what their own MTSS looks like at the site level, even within the classroom. An exercise that I had my counselors do was, what does your MTSS system look like from your perspective? How are you involved? Because that gets them to understand the true system of a framework. And yes, MTSS is huge, but you can narrow it down to what you're doing and what your kids need. And then the third thing is at any level to be data driven, because if you're data driven, then you can really start looking at the root cause, which is the fourth item. Always have your MTSS in mind when you're looking for the root cause. Why did this happen? And it's at the school level. It could be at the district level, but always get it down to that student level, because that's how you're going to be able to support and have patience with it. Again, every system has multiple individuals, a school with X amount of teachers, counselors, and so forth. It takes a long time to get everyone on the same page. But if you start with the big picture, narrow it down to what we're doing at this school, narrow it down to what we're doing at this classroom, people are going to really get a deep understanding of MTSS, a deep understanding of their own system. And just by doing that on an ongoing basis, you're going to start emphasizing the root causes of whatever you try to emphasize, and you're going to get to a good place for kids.
I love that. So getting everyone on the same page about what MTSS is and what it means to them individually and collectively at the site level or in the classroom, being very data-driven at every level, using that data to look for root causes, what's really causing what's happening, and just being patient with that process and being patient about everyone getting back onto the same page. That's very wise advice for any of us just starting out. So thank you so much, Moises, for sharing your insight and your experience with us today. And thank you all for listening. This has been the Engaging Leadership Show, and I'm CT signing off. And that's all for the Engaging Leadership Show today. If these stories resonated with you at all, head over to engagingleadershipshow.com, all one word, where you can subscribe for free to receive more leadership stories and strategies every week. Also, at that link, you can access the archive of all the featured episodes we've published in summary form. It's a veritable treasure trove of educational leadership wisdom distilled for your learning pleasure. Once again, the link is engagingleadershipshow.com. Sign up today to receive the next summary this very week. Until next time, keep leading with purpose and passion, and I'll see you in the next episode.